G'day viewers. In this segment I'll provide you with an introduction to the transport layer. But first, congratulations are in order. This diagram shows where we are in the course, and you can see that we've gone through the physical, link and network layers, and now we're starting on the transport layer. The transport layer builds on the services of the network, and it delivers data across the network to applications with different kinds of reliability or quality depending on the transport service model. So here are a couple of slides just to recall where we are with protocols in general. This diagram shows two hosts communicating across a network with a single router, and you can ignore all of the details of the protocols. They happen to be TCP, IP and so forth. The point I want to make is that TCP, the transport layer, is communicating information from host to host across the network. And this is the first time we've reached a layer where all of the information that's sent by it is not examined by devices inside the network, or at least it shouldn't be. That wasn't the case with the network, link and physical layer, where intermediate systems, switches and routers, handled all of the information there. The transport layer is really using the network simply to get information between hosts. And we can also provide just a brief review in terms of data units. The name for a message at the transport level is a segment. And you can see here that segments, here's a segment. They have transport control information like a TCP header as well as a payload. The payload is application data that's carried across the network. The segment itself is carried within a packet at the network layer and within a frame at the link layer. Okay, so I'm going to spend most of this segment talking about the different kinds of transport services that a transport layer might offer to its user and application. Now, there are many different transport services you could imagine. The axes I'm going to use to classify them here are the ones that we use in the internet. A transport service could provide either reliable or unreliable transport. By reliable, we mean if you send it, it will be delivered to the other side. Unreliable, packets can be lost in the network, and this will be exposed to the transport user. Packets can still be lost in the network with a reliable service model. It's just the transport layer takes care of fixing this, so the transport layer doesn't see any of the loss. So that was this top axis. And you can also see a distinction in the unit of data that's transferred. We might transfer individual messages, sort of like a post office model, or an infinite stream of bytes. That's the byte stream model. Now, in the internet, we really provide two kinds of service for applications to use, two transport services. The common one you probably heard of is TCP. TCP is actually the protocol that implements one of the services. The service itself is a stream service. It's a reliable byte stream, a bidirectional reliable byte stream between applications. The other service that the internet provides is a datagram model where you send messages. That service is implemented by UDP. Okay, let's just compare some of the features of these two different transport services to get a little bit of a feeling for how they differ, what different kinds of services you could get depending on what the transport layer does for you. So on the left here we have TCP in this table, and you can see that TCP, well, it sends information reliably, and so there are many features that are related to reliability. Connections have to be set up. The bytes then are delivered reliably, meaning essentially that they're delivered once and in the same order that they were sent. Actually, ordering and reliability are somewhat separate, but we get both of them here. There is also, since it's a byte stream, it's an arbitrary content length model. You can send as many bytes as you like. They will have to be divided into packets or segments inside the network, but that's the transport layer's business. At the other side, you'll receive messages as if they came in on an infinite byte stream. The transport layer with TCP also provides flow control to match sender to the receiver capabilities. We haven't seen any of this yet. We're going to in the future, so I don't expect you to know what flow control is yet, nor congestion control. That's going to be a mechanism that matches the sender to the network's capabilities in terms of its bandwidth. So you can see here TCP is really quite a full-featured protocol. It does a lot on top of the network layer to provide a service for applications. On the other hand, UDP on the left side, on the right side of this table, is really just a glorified packet transport. It does very little over IP. You send datagrams, well, they're really like packets. The messages, just like the post office, they can be lost and reordered. Somewhat like the postal service, they can be duplicated in a network, so you could send one copy and two could come out. That's a little odd, but that could happen. There's a limited message size because these are like packets, these datagrams, and you can send them at any time. Now this might sound good, but essentially here I'm saying that the transport service provides you no guidance on when it's a good time to send in terms of the receiver being able to handle those messages or the network being able to deliver them. TCP helps us with those tasks. So this right-hand column, you can also see that if I wrote down the capabilities for packets, they would be very much like this. So here we see a bit of a dichotomy between TCP and UDP. You either get basically nothing but IP or the whole kitchen sink in terms of features. Okay, let me go on and talk more about the interface between the transport layer and the application layer, which is using it as a service. We've actually seen this interface before. It's our good old Sockets API. Now, Sockets provided this simple abstraction called a socket to use the network. Before we talked about the network API, they're really allowing applications to use the network. But now that we're zoomed in, you can see they're really providing an interface to a transport layer service. Sockets are used to write all of the different internet applications you see out there. The Socket API supports both of these kinds of internet transport services, both the streams and the datagrams that we just saw. When we looked at sockets before, we only looked at the stream model. And you might have also seen this, we call this the connection-oriented, or a connection-oriented transport, and datagrams are connection-less. Just different names for some of those kinds of services. A little bit more about the sockets. If you recall, one of the key addressing attributes in the socket model is ports. Ports are where applications attach to the transport layer, and sockets, these different ports are what lets multiple different applications use the same transport layer instance on a given machine. So we can multiplex the network between different applications. You can see here two applications, 1 and 2, using different sockets and ports, that's the addressing, to attach to the transport layer. Here was the API, again, for sockets. Again, we went through this a long time ago when we did an introduction to the course. So I'm not going to provide you an example of using this yet. I'll just point out here is the table. Now you know that it's the same kind of API that's used for both sockets and datagrams. It turns out, however, that these three calls here, listen, accept, and connect, you only need them for streams because this is all about setting up the connection. Datagrams are connectionless, so you don't need to establish any connection before you use them. Similarly, for send and receive, with the streams, we simply use send and receive to send information across the network and receive it at the other side. With our datagrams, slightly different forms are used, send to and receive from. This is because if you have no connection and you want to send information, a missing parameter you need to specify is who to send it to. And with a datagram model, you can actually send datagrams to many different receivers without having to set up any different connection between them over the same socket. Similarly, receive uses a form called receive from. Now that provides information about who sent the datagram to you, since many different senders could have sent that datagram that could be received on your port in a datagram model. Let's talk a little bit more about ports, and that will round out the service API that the transport layer provides in the internet to applications. So we've said that there are ports. These are the 16-bit identifiers which provide addressing for applications to use. Actually, it turns out that an application process which is running on machine is identified by the tuple of the IP address, so that sort of tells you the machine, the protocol, since this could be TCP and UDP, and they share the same port space, and the port number itself. Now, you could simply think of a port, even though it's a 16-bit number, as representing a numbered mailbox. Applications can lease those mailboxes to use the services of the transport layer, just like you might get a mailbox at a post office to use the postal system. In this case, not only would you get things delivered to it, but that's where you put things in when you want them sent across the network. Clients and servers use ports slightly differently. Servers often bind to what are called well-known ports. These are ports below 1024. The naming is not quite accurate. Really, these ports are ports which require administrative privileges to use. The idea here is that since you need to know the port to contact someone, servers are going to sit on well-known ports. They'll bind to well-known ports, so you'll know how to find a server. On the other hand, clients can use any old port. As long as they tell the server who they contact what port they're sitting on the other machine, the server will be able to reply back to them. So clients are assigned what are called ephemeral ports, and you can ask the OS just for a new port and it will pick one for you that's convenient for you to use temporarily. This table shows some of the well-known ports. You're probably familiar with some of them. So these are ports that servers would use so that a transport peer across the network would be able to open a connection to the server. The most common one here that you'll be familiar with, I bet, is port 80. That's used for the HTTP protocol for web traffic. Some of you might also have heard of port 443. That's used when we use HTTPS, a secure version of HTTP. And there are many other ports in the table. I won't go through them, but they provide different kinds of ways to access your mail, printers, remote systems, move files around, and so forth. All of the different ways we use the internet. Well, that's all I want to say about the transport service that's provided to higher layer applications. In the coming segments, we'll talk more about the implementation of that service inside the transport layer. So we've covered these service models here. That's all done. And when we look inside the transport layer, we'll now see all sorts of machinery. Most of it's going to be related to how TCP works. Its sliding window and how timeouts are used to provide reliability, how connections are set up, this mechanism called flow control, and so forth. There is one big part of TCP, however, that as a transport layer service that I'm going to defer until later, and that is congestion control, shown here in gray. Congestion control is about matching the transport rate at the edges of the network to the capabilities within the network, depending on the traffic. That's a major subject in itself, and we'll get to that later. First, we'll go through all of this other material on the transport layer. So let's go for it.